So good morning, everybody. I'm Ken Roberts. I chair the construction law group at Venable. It is the largest major law firm that represents owners in construction projects, rated by U.S. News as the #1 construction law group twice. They only give that award to one firm. Our biggest claim to fame is we've done over $50 billion in construction with no litigation. We do about 40 to 50 mediations a year, currently working on 3 major light rail projects throughout the United States. Just finished the Javits Center in New York, Moynihan Center in New York, working at Chicago O'Hare on their light rail and their major projects. And I think that the panelists that you're going to hear from today all have really interesting insights as to what they're facing in infrastructure. And if any of you have ever gone or participated at the Chicago Booth School, at their business school, their main crux is that it's the repetition. It is seeing the issue at multiple levels that gives you a competitive advantage. And I think that a group like this, getting their insight as to what they're facing on infrastructure from the different perspectives that they bring to the table, that's going to give you, I think, some unique insights as to issues that you're going to face or clients that you're going to face, the challenges that come with this influx of money, both in terms of getting good contractors, the competition that's going to be out there. We're going to go in alphabetical order, and I'm going to ask each speaker give a little background on themselves and then the themes. So we're going to start with Thomas Carney, First Deputy Commissioner, Chicago Department of Transportation. If any of you have dealt with Chicago, the city and its transportation issues, you know who Tom is. He's been around the block for a while and is considered one of the stalwarts in the City Hall on the issues of transportation. So Tom?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Well, thank you very much. Pleasure to be here. Thank you for that very kind introduction that you gave there. I did not ask him to do that at all or give him a free any free CDOT swag. But yes, I'm Tom Carney, First Deputy Commissioner with Chicago Department of Transportation. I've been with city government for about 22 years, 20 of those years with CDOT. The past 12 years primarily in operations, construction, maintenance, and operations. I like to tell people that I'm the oldest young man you ever met in your life. But for those who aren't familiar with CDOT, so we're all things in the public way in the city of Chicago. So roads, sidewalks, alleys, signs, markings, bridges. Bridges is a big thing for us. The city has more movable bridges than any other city in the world. We execute over 20,000 bridge lifts a year. So quite an undertaking in that regard. Over 4,000 miles of streets. So we not only maintain and construct, but we also, permit the use of the public way. So we work very closely with various agencies. So in my time with CDOT, and particularly the last 12 years, I had a role as Deputy Commissioner over in-house construction. That was 750 plus trades employees. We have one of the largest in-house construction workforces in the country. And then from there, I was the managing deputy over operations. And then since 2017, I've been the first deputy commissioner of CDOT overall department operations. So, with that size of an in-house workforce, with our responsibility of that number of bridges and miles of street, there's never really a dull moment. But a couple things I wanted to touch on today was, the concept of, we always hear the saying, it's feast or famine. in my time with the city, it was kind of been the other way around, his famine, and then now there's a feast, so to speak. So for many years, from 2010 to about 2017, very difficult budgets for the city of Chicago, finding ways to how do we keep this going? How do we, put on a little bit more duct tape? How do we get more creative? How do we be more efficient? A lot of focus on, renegotiating union contracts to get some more efficiency, more cost savings, trying to innovate things, trying to work more efficiently, try new things out. It was really the feast, or I'm sorry, it was really the famine, I should say, a little backwards there. But there was, I really think the smart lighting, the Chicago Smart Lighting Program was a really historical thing, not just nationally, not just for infrastructure in the city and state and country, but also for CDOT. It was a major investment to change Chicago's lighting infrastructure, lighting of high-pressure sodium light fixtures, that orange glow that was known in Chicago, to change that to LED, white light LED, energy-efficient fixtures. That came down the pike in 2016 and 2017. We are now complete with that. It's been the largest fixture swap-out conversion to LED lights in the country. 280,000 fixtures have been changed to LED. The savings are enormous. Over 10 years, it's going to save the city $100 million in energy savings, reduces our carbon footprint. There was local hiring, local manufacturing involved in it. And we're certainly happy about that, not only was it completed on time, on budget, but it really gave folks a sense of like, wow, really great things can happen when we put some money towards infrastructure. And it really gave us an opportunity to show folks that, hey, public works agencies can really deliver and can really change the lives of, a city, of the residents, of, driving at night. It's clear. It helped public safety, that folks, that the police can see a little bit more clearly, things like that. There's a whole technology component to it, that each of the fixtures has a smart node, so we find out when the lights are out versus where we previously relied on the public to call 311. Hey, our light's out, our alley light's out. So to really change that dynamic and use technology, it's been a game changer. And we continue to, hear all the anecdotal benefits of that program. So I feel like it complemented the work CDOT did with the 606, which was converting an abandoned rail line to a trail through a neighborhood. It complemented our work to build out the Riverwalk. And I feel like it really came at a time where it put people's faith back in, wow, a major city department, public works agencies can really do great things. And that led into, some change of administration, some change of philosophy on things. And now comes the feast, which, what a feast it really is. So in a short amount of time here in Chicago and state of Illinois, there's a major capital program, Rebuild Illinois, which was contemplated or complemented by Invest in Cook, so Cook County, which is where Chicago is. Chicago then came through with Chicago Works. And then now, just to make sure, I guess the federal government was feeling left out, so they had launched their thing, Build Back Better. So it's been an unprecedented amount of capital that's now come flowing in. And so our challenge really is to how do we ramp up quickly. Quickly is not even the right word, to get this work out into the streets, into the communities. How do we go pivot from this duct tape, keeping things going, to, great things, building great things, pushing the limits that we've, previously had. So there's definitely my Commissioner Biaggi likes to say that we've been working to fly the plane while we're still building it. Is certainly what's going on right now. And it's an exciting time. It certainly is. And from my perspective, from having, had these, previous 7 to 8 years of really lean budgets and how do we keep it together, it's really almost like a second career here, trying to be on the offensive more than on the defense. So,
As you wrap it up, what's the one lesson that you learned from Smart Lights in terms of a major project that you rolled out that you'll keep in mind as you look at other adventures?
Yeah, so just to wrap it up, the technology piece was really interesting because technology-wise, the whiz kids and the things that are being produced are amazing, and they can create so much wonderful stuff and really solve a lot of problems. But there's a divide in that level of expertise in a workforce, in an agency with one, we have about 1,200 employees. And that divide, that technical divide is really getting great. And what you really learn is that the people in the middle who can communicate to both sides and say, well, this works, or they can bring this group forward and bring this group over here, they're critical. So good communication and some people who are in the middle are actually the most important things, as opposed to that person who's the smartest technology person and then the person who's, just not really tech savvy.
Excellent. Thank you, Tom. Next, we're going to hear from Krista Dula, who is the Deputy Director of Entrepreneurship, Innovation, Technology with the Illinois Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity. Krista? Sorry, yeah.
Can you hear me?
Okay, yeah, good.
Perfect. Christy Dula, the Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity. I am the Deputy Director for the Office of Entrepreneurship, Innovation, and Technology, the innovation for Dave, wherever he is. The Illinois Department of Commerce actually kind of covers a wide breadth of different bureaus. So there's everything from like film to tourism to community assistance to business development. The bureau that I oversee is more focused on small businesses and tech startups. So anything brick and mortar small business to tech startups, the programs and resources available for them, and then some of the programs that we are rolling out on the technology front. So prior to this position, I actually worked in venture, and prior to that was part of the launch team for 1871, if anybody's familiar with the tech incubator and the merchandise mart. So I love tech and I love innovation, and it's fun to bring all of it together. But from the infrastructure perspective, I mean, DCEO, or Department of Commerce, Economic Opportunity, so many acronyms in government. I was not ready for that when I came here. But there are several infrastructure programs that come out of our community assistance, community development offices, business development offices, and a lot of the times I feel like people think of infrastructure and they think roads or bridges, and a lot of the time some of those grants that we are putting out to local communities are to help with water lines or sewer or housing upgrades and whatnot, so that everything can be sanitary and everything is still up to code and people can live a good life in their home, right? But then there's also programs that we have out of DCEO that are a little bit more focused on kind of the technology side of everything. So we do have, it was $420 million in broadband grants, some of which are for infrastructure. And one thing I really love about, this is a different bureau altogether run by Matt Schmidt, but one thing I want to give him kudos for, and that is actually thinking through, there's the infrastructure grants, and then they have added a program that helps with training. So it's a cohort they do 6 local governments at a time. It's a 14-week long cohort where these local governments are really getting prepared for all of these infrastructure grants that are coming through, whether it be state or federal level. But it's really helping them to be prepared for that and be able to execute as quickly as possible and as efficiently as possible once they obtain those dollars. So I do feel you on the, I mean, it kind of did go from we were very, very lean and now still working on the lean part of that, and hiring in government doesn't happen as quickly as in the private sector, I've learned. But yeah, it's a good problem to have right now because there are a lot of dollars flowing through. And it's really helping people to connect. I think we all saw as a result of the pandemic, a lot of us went to remote working immediately, and Zoom and WebEx and whatnot just like skyrocketed, right? So having broadband throughout the state is extremely important, and it does create jobs when we've got those infrastructure projects going. Another example of something we did, which was the first of its kind nationwide, was rolled out a wet lab capital program. This was part of Rebuild Illinois dollars that we used. So in Illinois, we know that we have a ton of talent coming from our universities. We have, as far as an industry perspective goes, life sciences is really key here. We have a lot of major corporations here in Illinois. One of the challenges we were running into, which again, I feel like can be a good problem as long as you jump in to help solve it, is there was more demand than we had supply for wet lab space, especially for startups or university researchers. And so we were seeing that we might be losing some of the talent to other states if we don't have the critical infrastructure to support these businesses as they're starting up. And so we did roll that out. That was $15.4 million to help build out new wet lab spaces. It was all for multi-tenant, so it couldn't just be like a company was doing their own. But that did help as far as getting more space, and we're continuing to see more grow out there. But I think one of the key things that is really important is being sure that when we're building these programs that there's an equitable approach to the design of it, which also includes having other stakeholders, other partners at the table. What's the saying about it? It's inclusive it's diversity if you have a seat at the table. It's inclusion if you're able to eat, right? And so I think it's really important that when you're designing these, not waiting until you've already designed it and then putting it in front of people and saying, hey, so this is good. Be sure that people are included in the decision-making processes and that you have diversity at the table and not just checking a box. I'm talking diversity in leadership decision-making positions. So if you're thinking of your company and you say, we're rather diverse, but you look at your leadership team and it's not diverse, stop it and do better. That's all. It is going to help you to build more equitable programs as a whole. And then the flip side, and I'll wrap it right after this, but another thing that we have given a lot of thought to with the infrastructure projects is being sure that we are creating the economic value in multifaceted ways, right? So we need to be sure that when we are putting grants out for these projects, and we do have goals that are set for minority-owned businesses as vendors and women-owned businesses, so on and so forth. I think it's really important that if these are in local communities, that those small businesses and those small vendors in these local communities or underserved communities are able to kind of get a bite of the apple. And so one of the programs out of my shop is the Illinois Procurement Technical Assistance Centers, which help these small businesses to get all their certifications, go through all the paperwork, navigate through all the minutia that is doing work with the government and obtaining government contracts. And so I think that's a really key way that we should be thinking of these infrastructure projects to ensure that we are providing value in various
Great.
ways.
Thank you, Christy. You're going to have a couple of busy years ahead of you. Next, we have Brian Platt, the city manager of City of Kansas City. One of the things I think about infrastructure construction is how small of a world it is. Brian's predecessor and the mayor, I did a lot of work for. They had a number of major infrastructure projects that had wound up in litigation. And the mayor absolutely didn't want it to be front page news. So I did a series of mediations with their top projects and contractors to resolve everything behind closed doors. One of the things that governments don't talk about is if there's litigation and it's front page, it depresses the bidding pool because contractors don't want to be in litigation as well. When you're able to resolve things behind closed doors, not only is it good for the image of the mayor or the politics, but it's also good in terms of replenishing your bidding pool. When they see problems being resolved, that helps them want to work with that agency, that government. So I'm excited to hear from Brian and what's going on in Kansas City. Brian?
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Brian Platt, City Manager for Kansas City, Missouri. Been in this role for about 19 and a half months, and I am counting because someone in the Midwest asked me twice a day, oh, how long has it been, a year? And I'm just counting. Previously the city manager of Jersey City, New Jersey for a few years, and it's been interesting to do this sort of work in two different states and with sort of two different political contexts and a lot of the same needs, but a lot of different needs. What I want to talk about today is how you can find creative solutions to finance infrastructure. It's really easy when you get a big pot of money from the government, tens or hundreds of millions of dollars for infrastructure, and you say, okay, we're just gonna do a bunch of it, like here's the cash, it's done. But that's usually not the case. In fact, it's rarely or ever the case for a lot of people, and this is a really interesting opportunity for us. But what happens after this money's gone? And how do we continue to maintain it? It's not sustainable just to assume there's going to be a big pot of money showing up every few years. So we're trying to take creative approaches to how we figure out how to pay for these things. And a little background in Kansas City, that's probably the same in a lot of the cities and places that you all work or live. Elected officials, the political leaders of your city, never want to do deferred maintenance. They never want to spend a lot of money on the things that aren't going to get them reelected and aren't sexy and like you can't put on a campaign poster. Sometimes there's some overlap, like maybe you've got a pothole or a street resurfacing problem, great, but otherwise they're not going to say, hey, I'm the mayor who, replaced 80 miles of sewer last year in your neighborhood. You should reelect me. It's just not a thing. So we're taking a look at each of these things that we're trying to fix and improve and expand on and thinking, is there a way for it to pay for itself? Is there a private partner that can fund it? Does the thing generate money that we can use to pay to offset the cost of it? And the streetlight example is really interesting and compelling for us, and I like to tell it a lot. So Kansas City, of few less streetlights, only about 90,000 streetlights. We spend $13 million a year on streetlight maintenance and replacement of the bulbs. We are doing an LED conversion as well, and we are poised to save $5 million a year from that. So this is something that'll pay for itself over time. The problem is, how do you finance it in the first place? How do you get that cash in the beginning to then be able to do the conversion and then have the savings later? And that's where you got to get creative with it. We've explored a lot of different things. Can we maybe front some cash from some of the stimulus dollars that we're getting? Can we move forward with a bid or a proposal from a contractor that will help us do that for us? Will they maybe wait a few years to accept the first payment or let us pay them over time? There are a lot of creative ways to do it. And I would say that there's maybe not a right answer, but there's probably a contextual answer that's going to work for you the best. But either way, it's a great example of how you don't have to spend more money to get the improvements you need. We're building a new airport terminal in Kansas City also, and it's $1 billion plus project. The taxpayers are not paying a dime for it. It's being paid through changes in the fees on the airline tickets that anyone going into or out of Kansas City pays. And it's a small amount, a nominal amount, no one will notice, and it actually is in line with fees at any other airport. But there's a way to take the cost of this $1 billion plus project and have it financed through the people who are the consumers of that project. And it sounds very obvious, but that's never the first proposal when you have a project like that. The first proposal is always just write a bond. Are there grants? Talk to your senator, talk to your congresspeople. Like, let's just find the pot of cash. But again, it's not going to be the case a lot. There's another really interesting project we're working on. It's putting a park on top of a stretch of lowered highway that cuts right through the middle of downtown Kansas City. And the analogy we use is Clyde Warren Park in Dallas. I don't know if anyone's been there, but Dallas also has a highway cutting right through the middle of it. Years ago, that highway was the delineator between a developed, dense neighborhood to the north and not a lot of economic activity to the south. It just really, it made it so that was just going to be the boundary. They put a park on top. It reduced the environmental impacts of that highway, the noise, the air pollution. It created a gathering place, and it also unlocked development south of that piece of highway. And we've got the exact same vision for Kansas City as well. It's just unbelievable how aligned and similar those two projects are. But how do you pay for it? And, you know, one of the things that we've talked about very bluntly is, can the city even put up a dime for this project to put a park on top of a highway in downtown, given all the other issues that we've got? Affordable housing, crime, homelessness, all these things that plague cities all over the place. How almost like, how dare us take money away from those things to put a new park on top of a highway? That, is it necessary? No. Will it help the city? Yes. But is it the top priority? I wouldn't say it is, but it's going to be great for the city. So we're trying to think of creative ways to finance that. And this is a conversation and a conflict that cities are going to have all over the place. Like, how do you take your limited amount of money and fund all the things you've got? There's no city in the country that has enough money to do all the things they want to do. So we've spent a lot of time. This idea predates me being here. We spent a lot of time trying to find local partners, state partners, federal partners to find money for this sort of thing, to figure out who's going to benefit from it. So it turns out, of course, property owners are going to benefit tremendously from having this new asset in front of them, being the front door to this gathering place, the focal point of Kansas City. So obviously, they're going to gain financially. They should probably be some of the investors in something like this. So we've made some calls, and we're getting some really positive support right off the bat for this sort of thing. And it's, you know, it's me making phone calls in between meetings, and next thing you know, we've raised millions of dollars to get the thing going and to get the design process going. That money is then leveraged into other grants and other funding sources that we've got at the federal and state level. Next thing you know, we're getting really close to funding a $150 million project with zero local taxpayer dollars being used. And the project isn't done. In fact, it hasn't even started yet. We're just doing due diligence on it right now. But you can kind of see the vision and where it's going to go, and it's great to talk about. And these are some examples of ways that we're trying to be creative with how we're financing our projects here, because it's great to have a big pot of money, but it's not going to be the norm, and we can't get used to it. And there's so much more to be done after that. And we're also thinking about this creative financing, even though we've got a big pot of money. And, you know, I'll be frank also with this. We're not using a lot of our stimulus ARPA dollars for infrastructure. We're shoring up our budget. Our budget got decimated by the pandemic. And so we've had to take most of it and just fill budget holes and rebuild our reserves and make sure that we can continue to provide essential city services for our residents and our visitors. So we haven't said, oh, we've got $100 million to just fix all of our bridges and our roads. It's been the opposite. We're trying to make sure that we don't go bankrupt and that we have people to drive on the roads in our city. So it's a really interesting time for us. And it actually has been an opportunity to allow us to be more creative and force those conversations. We're asking why about every single dollar, every contract we've got, every service we provide. Is there a way to do it cheaper? Do we even need it? Do we need to outsource it? Do we need to insource it? We're having all those conversations now, and it's pushed us to be more creative and thoughtful about our approach to it.
Thank you, Brian. That's excellent. Next, we're going to have Karen Roguglia, who is the Bureau Chief Transit Capital for Illinois Department of Transportation. And I know you're going to have your hands full in the next couple of years. So Karen, give us some insight on what's going on at DOT.
Let's see, does this sound like it's working? Great, I think. Karen Rogel, thanks, Ken, Bureau Chief of Transit Capital at the Illinois Department of Transportation. You may be thinking, did she just say transit? IDOT is a highway organization. IDOT does primarily do highways, but we also do fund a lot of transit throughout the state. And I'm gonna pick on Brian a little bit because he just said it's really easy when there's a ton of money. We in Illinois are really lucky to have passed the Rebuild Illinois program in 2019, which resulted in billions of dollars for transportation that went to IDOT. For transit specifically, it's $4.5 billion, and 4 of that is going to the RTA, the Chicago region, in Northeast Illinois. The rest of that is for downstate projects, or statewide, sorry, so anywhere outside of the Chicago region. Of that, $336 million is competitive funding that we are granting out through a competitive application process. And so managing that application process, selecting projects when there's so much in need, as well as I'll talk about challenges we've had with implementing, sort of along the lines of Tom's feast-famine discussion. But we're currently in our 3rd round of call for projects. The first one, typical, I think, of when there's a feast after years of famine, there hadn't been a lot of planning work done. So we got a lot of applications, but not as many as we probably should have. We ended up funding everything in that first round, and now we're on our 3rd round. So the second round, we did implement weighted criteria for decision-making, selecting projects, and those included things like equity, geographic distribution throughout the state, project readiness, long-term financial planning for maintenance of the project, as well as balancing expansion, new and expansion projects versus state of good repair. So we do, of course, the politicians want to see big fancy new projects, but we also wanted to weight heavily state of good repair things that might not be funded through other pots of money or other funding sources, to make sure that we weren't neglecting those, putting a new roof on an old facility so that we can extend its life by 20 years. And so we did weight those quite heavily, both but separately, and so no one project could get all the points, basically. We're now in our 3rd round of applications, and we tweaked the criteria a little bit. Also had a project planning section, so how much planning had the agency done with its local and regional partners to make sure that it's a project of significance for the region. And I will briefly just touch on some of the challenges we've had implementing that massive capital program. One, I would say they fall into 2 main buckets. The one is capacity of our grantees. We have a lot of grantees throughout the state, small urbans, rural agencies, that honestly have never built a facility, ever. And now they've got $10 million to build a facility, and they don't know where to start. And so building the capacity in our grantees has been a big focus. We also review bid documents before our agencies go out to bid, especially for larger projects. And I would say we've upped our game in that area. We've really started to scrutinize, and with the competitive bidding environment right now, the downside of the feast is that there are so many projects being let, and there just aren't enough companies to build them. So we're seeing a highly, highly competitive bidding environment, non-competitive bidding environment, where we're getting single bids, and we're really scrutinizing the specs to make sure, they're not restrictive, or the bid didn't go out in such a way that really made it non-competitive, not attractive for bidders. And we have actually canceled bids after an IFB was opened because we decided it wasn't competitive, the bid wasn't good enough. So we're really trying to get things right and do it right instead of just get the money out, but also then the challenge of actually getting the money out and getting the project started has been a big one. So I would say that's the one. And then the other bucket, as everybody knows, is the current economic climate with inflation and cost escalation is really causing us a lot of trouble in terms of both projects that were applied for in the first round of rebuild. The independent cost estimates, have been blown out of the water. We have seen anywhere from 10 to 30% increases over ICE and also on our vehicle contracts. So we are reserving a portion of funding in this third round likely for cost overruns and escalation, which of course we all hope will remedy itself and not be an issue in a year or two, but I'm not that optimistic. So we're going to make sure we have a buffer and some spare money.
Thank you, Karen.
Yep.
I think you could have a whole program. We're working with about 25 to 30 government entities, cities, counties, states, and every one of them on the independent cost estimate are having troubles because of inflation, because of supply chain. It's a huge issue where it's taking unexpected dollars for those projects. It's impacting schedules, and it is causing a lot of havoc in the industry. Most experts don't see those supply chains, the inflation issues, the difficulties with ICE issues resolving in the next 3 to 4 years. So that, Karen, that would have been a brilliant program on itself as to what everybody on this panel is trying to do to confront those. Last but not least, we got Ty Warner. He's going to talk about the RISE grant, South Shore Westlake commuter rail projects, as well as the Marquette Greenway projects and the impact that it's had on his community. Ty?
Great. Thank you very much, Ken. Great to be on this panel. Great to see you all this morning. If I could just ask real quick, how many of you are from the Chicagoland general area? So a good chunk, but a lot of you that aren't. So we are, I work for the Northwestern Indiana Regional Planning Commission. And let me ask another question. How many of you work with MPOs or metropolitan planning organizations or know what that is? All right, so we are the MPO, Regional Council of Governments for Northwest Indiana, so we're just over the state line. Everything on the southern shore of Lake Michigan, Lake Porter and LaPorte counties, about a population of about 800,000. But in the general Chicago orbit, so we're part of the metropolitan statistical area for Chicago, which creates some interesting challenges because I'm going to talk about this a lot actually, but that boundary between Illinois and Chicago is becoming more and more permeable all the time, which is a really good thing. So that is good cooperation between those two states. But yet there's like legacy ways that infrastructure gets funded that still stop at that state line and make things really challenging. And yet these projects that Kenneth mentioned, these are both things that cross the state lines that we have to work with entities, and in one case, a tri-state project. And I can say, so I worked I was Will County, Illinois planning director for a lot of years and worked for the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for planning for a time. And actually worked for the Flint Hills Regional Council in Manhattan, Kansas. So the American Regional Council was really helpful to us. So yeah, I loved Kansas City, by the way, and I'm glad that you're there. So anyway, I can honestly say that when I worked on the Illinois side of things, we didn't really think, and I'm embarrassed to say this now since I work for NERPC, but we didn't really think about Indiana much at all. It was another state, and there's another state line, so it just didn't really enter the consciousness so much. And as I got to NERPC, I realized that not only did the general Chicago area on the Illinois side not really think about Northwest Indiana, but Indianapolis and the Indianapolis State Legislature didn't really think about Northwest Indiana also, because the folks in the rest of Indiana say, well, that's just Chicago. That's so different from the rest of the state. So it got overlooked by everybody. But fortunately, that has drastically changed in, I'd say, the last 5 years or so. And these projects are a testament to that. So we have the only commuter rail line in Indiana, the South Shore line, which if you're visiting here, you can take and just experience the dunes. And I should say that. We are the home of the Indiana Dunes National Park, one of the more recent national parks. Which I always like to throw this in, actually has more varieties of orchids than Hawaii and greater biodiversity than Yellowstone. So birthplace of ecology in this country, which is another fascinating story. But that whole story of the dunes and environment and industry and the steel mills is a really interesting one as well. If you ever get a chance to see a documentary that has been making the way across the country called Shifting Sands, it tells that whole story, and it's absolutely fascinating. So, okay, that's my little plug for Northwestern Indiana. So we have the only commuter rail line goes from Chicago to South Bend, and right now that track is largely single-tracked. So it shares short line freight. Something breaks down, it's not the most efficient ride in the world. In fact, a lot of people take it. It has great ridership into Chicago, but a lot of folks don't take it for speed. You take it for other factors, that you want to do other things on the train. You don't want to mess with parking, rush hour, et cetera. Well, that is changing. So we've received through New Start grants from the Federal Transit Administration and some help from the Indiana State Legislature, who is committing $12 million per year for these two projects, and an organization we have in Northwest Indiana that's a state agency called the Regional Development Authority. We are now full speed ahead to double track the South Shore line, so you can bypass, drastically increases speeds. So from Michigan City, it's like, I don't know, an hour and a half or so to get into Chicago. That's Michigan City, Indiana, so just on the border. And with that double tracking, it'll be under an hour. So it gets speeds much more competitive with Metro, what Metro riders are used to in Chicago, and it's going to be a really helpful thing. And then on top of that, coming out of Hammond, which is in the northwest corner of Indiana, there'll be a whole new commuter rail line called the Westlake Corridor that parallels the Indiana-Illinois state line down through Munster and Dyer. Brand new rail service. So those things are going to be working in tandem to get people to the jobs in Chicago. I don't know that this is true, but this is what folks say a lot, is that there's actually more jobs in Chicago's loop than the entire state of Indiana. So the thinking Northwest Indiana is get folks to those jobs. I'm not a big fan of the competition that I'm just being honest, that some folks in Indiana have had with Illinois. I don't know that they're still up, but for a long time there were billboards around O'Hare and whatnot that were really doing the hard sell of Illinois to buy higher taxes. That's what the billboard said. Move to Indiana, the state that works. That was their tagline. There have been something like 80,000 people that have crossed the border into Northwest Indiana to come to a better tax environment. But the way that we have looked at that, at least at NERPC, is that we are one big economy, and if everybody succeeds, everybody succeeds. If we were dependent on Chicago, and part of the funding of that double track and that Westlake is acknowledging that we're part of the 8th largest economy in the world. It's not worth trying to do that hard competition. People will make choices that make sense for them. We don't need to try to steal from Illinois. So that project is going in. Then on top of that, we received a RAISE grant, which was formerly BUILD, which was formerly Tiger. Fourth time was the charm. We received $7 million to finish the Marquette Greenway, which is a multi-purpose trail connecting Chicago all the way across to Northwest Indiana to New Buffalo, Michigan, up in the southwest corner of Michigan. And we are super excited about that, although in some ways, and I think some of the challenges with receiving funds have already been alluded to here, it's the same thing with this. It's kind of like the dog that catches the car, and then what do you do with the car once you catch the car? The reality of trying to implement that on our scale has, we're making it, but it's just been a big challenge. But on the positive side of that, the partnership with the Federal Highway Administration with USDOT has been really helpful on that. We've had regular meetings, and that's been really encouraging. So the communities along that trail, and also along that South Shore line double tracking, and to some extent also that Westlake corridor, wide variety of communities in Northwest Indiana. And some of you are familiar with Gary, Indiana, and the disinvestment that Gary has struggled with. Also Hammond and East Chicago. These projects that I'm talking about go right through those communities, and so that gets access to jobs, access to trails, and everything that is activated for economic development along those pathways, those corridors. We have a very popular trails map that we produce with all the trails connections in Northwest Indiana. We had 13 miles of paved trail in 1990. That number is over 200 miles of paved trail today. And it gets used a lot for access to the dunes and everything. The South Shore line, recently we worked out a way for them to be able to get bikes on the trains. And so folks can take their bikes out from Chicago or vice versa and be able to access those trails by using the train corridor. So, and I know we're running down on time, but let me just say this because I think it's really important and is going to change the face of Northwest Indiana in the next few years. The Indiana legislature, also in a stroke of brilliance actually, when they funded that double track and that Westlake corridor, they adopted transit development districts along each one of those station locations. And it's kind of like tax increment financing where that There's a development incentive to create transit-oriented development around each of those stations. So that's like 12 stations in Northwest Indiana that those communities are in the process right now, defining their boundaries, figuring out what their development packages are, how they're going to attract more dense, walkable, livable communities around each one of those stations. We may have a lot of price points in Northwest Indiana. You can buy a home at any price level, but we don't have a lot of housing types. There are environments that are completely missing from Northwest Indiana. And so in the next few years, that will drastically change the face of things. So,
Ty, I want to thank you. I want to thank the panel. I want to keep everybody on time. I know they have a full agenda day, so thank you, panel. Great insights. I hope you guys learned something. Thank you.